Namaste. Welcome to the 4th edition of the Global Festival of Oneness, organized by Indica Moksha and celebrating the life and works of Adi Shankara. My name is Anuradha and I'm the host for today's session. Let us start with a prayer. Sadashiva Samarambham, Shankaracharya Madhyamam, Asmadacharya Paryantam, Vande Guru-Paramparam. We are very pleased to have with us Professor Staneshwar Timalasina, who is going to talk on a very interesting topic, Advaita Vedanta and Kashmir Shaivism, finding a common ground. Before we get on to the talk, I'd like to introduce the speaker. Professor Staneshwar ji has been traditionally trained, consecrated with the Diksha and authorized as Shivacharya within the Nepali Sarvamnaya order by his Diksha gurus. He was taught the Vedas, Nyaya, Mimamsa, Vedanta, Shaiva Siddhanta, Trika, Maharatha, and other Shastras in Nepal and Varanasi by various scholars. He has also received academic and philological training in the Mahendra Sanskrit University in Kathmandu and the Sampurananda Sanskrit University in Varanasi, as well as the Martin Luther University in Germany, where he acquired his PhD in classical Indian philosophy. He is currently professor of religious studies in San Diego State University, USA. He has long dedicated himself to the goal of preserving the traditions he has inherited in a modern, institutionalized way. He first founded the Tantric department of Nepal Sanskrit University in Kathmandu, and then he allowed the Shastric traditions to speak as subject in the global scenario through his academic works. And finally, he has founded the Vimarsha Foundation with the goal of preserving classical Shastric and sadhana training. Welcome, Professor Staneshwar ji. Very glad to have you with us. Please go ahead with the talk. We have about 55 minutes, and the last 5 minutes we'll take for any question answers.
Om Vishwam Darpana Drishyamana Nagari Tulyam Nijantargatam Pasyanatmani Mayaya Bahirivo Bhutam Yatha Nidraya Yaha Sakshat Kurute Prabodha Samaye Swatmana Meva Dvayam Tasmai Shri Guru Murtaye Namayidam Shri Dakshina Murtaye. I have chosen the topic to share with you today, the confluence of Advaita Vedanta and Kashmir Shaivism or Trika philosophy. This should not even be the topic of conversation if we did not have such big ignorance lying around to view these two schools as completely separated schools. In my work on Drishti Srishti Vada, the dissertation I published in 2006, I tried to establish that Advaita Vedanta, which we call the Shankara Advaita, is not a single school, single philosophy. There are at least 4 competing philosophical models of Avasa, Pratibimba, and Avachedavada. Within that, whether you belong to Eka Jiva or Aneka Jiva. And these are philosophically deep, and there are different positions, particularly between Bhamatikara, Vachaspati Mishra, and Padmapada Acharya, Prakashatman, the whole Vivarana Prasthana. But when the public thinks of the Advaita Vedanta, it simply takes Advaita as one single block philosophy, ignoring not even subtleties, the major differences that lie within. If we read in this context, you will find that what we consider Trika is not that different when we compare the subtleties within Advaita itself, because as I said, Advaita itself is a multiple philosophy, And you can consider Trika Siddhanta as yet another variation within the same broader philosophical spectrum. But I am not trying to dissolve the difference. As a scholar, we focus more on differences rather than dissolving differences. We dig out minor variations. And I'm happy to bring some of those differences to you. But today, I'm focused on something different to show you how these ideas are very much similar. And we should not think these two as some diametrically opposite philosophies. Because I hear that oftentimes Veda and Tantra, Vedic and Tantric divide, that whatever comes within Tantra is simply anti-Vedic. And this is what the colonial projection had been. And this is what broadly many people have uncritically accepted. And this whole idea of viewing Trika Siddhanta as juxtaposing the whole Advaita Siddhanta comes within that same chain of thought that does not critically reflect back to the heritage or the classical text, but simply accepts these two as rivalry philosophies. In my previous conversations, I have stressed on the confluence of Advaita Vedanta and Trika Siddhanta, primarily grounding my arguments on the Yoga Vasishta Mokshopaya Shastra. Today, I'm coming with you a very small book that I want you to be able to see there, the title. So I'm gonna present to you. This is the title is Siddhanta Panjara. And this book was written by some Vinayaka. The author is Vinayaka, and all we know about him is he was around 14th century and hailed from Kerala. Why I found this really small book and exact passages from this book insightful for today's conversation, a confluence of Advaita Vedanta and Trika Siddhanta, is this small text is actually edited by Sri Krishna Sarma and K. Kunjuni Raja. I am not familiar with the Krishna Sarma's other works, but I have read with great regard the works of Kunjuni Raja. And he's an impeccable Indologist and a philosopher. And you can see in the introduction of the Siddhanta Panjara how meticulously these editors and translators have excavated the history of the text and explored connections. But the twist is they are decisively reading this as an Advaita Vedanta text. And if you read this book a little closely, one of the things that drew my attention was right now I'm teaching Virupaksha Panchashika, a text for my Vimarsha course. And in this book, like go to chapter 2 and then 6 stages of I am, the ego distributed in properties in the body, in the mind and all that. And then I'm like, okay, this is not just a Trika concept. This is precisely a Virupaksha Panchashika's line. In here elaborated in multiple verses. And that made me to go back to the first chapter and read more closely and then read all the rest of the lines. And I got completely convinced that this small book has tremendous impact, and we should focus a little bit more of this because this shows a dissemination of the Trika philosophy, as some of us call Kashmiri Shaivism, in the South in 14th century. And this also is the first textual evidence of a deeper influence of a rarely read book, Virupaksha Panchashika. And then there are ample amount of examples to demonstrate the ways the author weaves from different conceptual frameworks from within Trika. Okay, if this is just a trigger test, why don't I just say that? But this is a little tricky thing, okay? Just I said that there is not much of a difference, and this book I'm reading just to establish the same argument. Because the author, Vinayaka, is consciously trying to create a bridge in which these two systems are read as a single philosophical school. And that is what makes it interesting. It's not in 21st century a Zoom world that we are trying to bridge these two philosophies. 14th century Kerala already felt the need to bridge these two philosophies, write a text where Advaita Vedanta and Trika Siddhanta read as a singular philosophy. I will, rather than connecting from here and there different positions, I would rather just read the book directly to you, a couple of verses that inspire me, and then let you to judge and let you to decide whether my observation stands your questioning and observation. So let me first extract the first verse. There are many Vedanta materials and then Trika materials woven together. And that is what I find so inspirational. Atmavari nidhau magnam jagat sarvam characharam tathapi tanna jananti maya vyamohita janaha. Even though the entire world, sentient and insentient, is submerged into the ocean of self-consciousness, people deluded by Maya do not realize it. And this one you can see is Maya Vyamohita, is very much you can see as Advaita a tone there. Gyapti rupe chidakase parashaktihi samudgata vahne rusmeva vigyeya shaktihi swabhaviki yataha. The absolute potency emerges in the sky of consciousness of the mere form of cognizing. Since this potency is intrinsic, it should be recognized like the heat corresponding to fire. Now, I find just like previous verse, I was reading as thoroughly Advaita Vedanta. This verse I'm reading thoroughly Trika text. Number one, the concept of Parasakti. Not a single Advaita text is ever going to tell you Maya as Parasakti. And this text is reading Maya in that line as a Parasakti. Parasakti Samudgata arises within that Chidakasa. And even more interesting, Navahner Dahika Shakti Vyatirikta Vibhavyate Kevalam Jnana Sattayam Prarambhoyam Praveshane. You can read the Vijnana Bhairava line, very commonly read in the Trika, very commonly cited. And then this is Vanne Rusmeva Vigeya Shakti Swabhavikiya. Number one, in the Trika system, Shiva and Shakti are not considered two separate entities. And then the example is given of the fire and its heat. And it is intrinsic, it is natural for fire to have the heating capacity. For if there is no heat, we do not call that entity fire. If there is no light, we do not call that the sun. So these are the intrinsic inherent properties. And that is how the whole idea of Shakti as Abhinabhava, inseparability, comes into play. And now let's go next verse. Shaktista Shaktimad Drupat Vyatirikta Nasa Bhavet. No, the author is not even satisfied with that much of a statement. He adds more. Shaktista Shaktimad Drupat Vyatirikta Nasa Bhavet. Prakashattam Parashaktihi Prakasaha Parameshwara. Potency is never separated from the one holding that potency. The highest potency is to be of the character of illumination, and the Supreme Lord is the illumination. Shaktiste Shaktimasthaiva Padartha Dvayamuchyate Shaktayosya Jagat Krishnam Shaktimastu Maheshwara. This is Agama. Okay. And then look at this. Shaktiste Shaktimat Rupat Vyaktirikta Nasabhavet. The author is consciously reading Agama lines and then slightly changing a few words and presenting to us that there is no separation between Shakti and Shaktiman. If this book is dogmatically to be labeled as a Advaita Vedanta text, then what is Shakti? If we consider Maya Shakti, then you cannot say that it is actually Shakti and Shaktiman Aveda, Maya and Brahman as Aveda. You know, that is not acceptable within the Advaita of Shankara. But this is not like, while it has so much of the Trika materials there, that is not that then therefore why don't you just dump it or box it in the Trika school, because then you will find more of the Advaita materials. Sthula rupamidam vishwam tasyantaha parikalpitam vrikshavije yatha vrikshaha sukshma rupa sthitas tatha. This world in its manifest form is conceptualized within the Supreme Lord, just like a tree is situated in its seed form. If you read Paratrishika, yet another Trika text, Yatha negrodha vijastha shakti rupo mahadruma tatha hridaya vijastam jagat etat characharam. So what does the verse say? Just like the people or the banyan tree, the seed, within that seed there lies the potency for this enormously large tree. The same way, within the heart, the consciousness, resides the potency for this entire world. And so, paropi shakti, paraya shaktya purna rupaha swayam prabhuhu shiva devani paryante stattvaihi pravishati kshanate. Now, even if the earlier stanzas were not clear, this text goes all the way, giving you the categories from Shiva to Prithvi Tattva, all the 36 categories, starting from Shiva to Avani Earth. So this is like a Paropi Shaktaya, Paraya Shaktya, Purna Rupaha Swayam Prabhu. When that absolute, replete with its potency of the absolute Shakti, then it manifests in the form, enters into the world of the categories from Shiva to Jagat. So it is considering 37th, like the Bhairava Bhattaraka, which is like then, because it says enters into Shiva to Prakriti, meaning even Shiva is the state wherein the Absolute has entered into. Ajarasya jadatvena vartanam duskaram bhavet tadeva tasya mayayaha swatantriyam avadharaya. So there, in the Advaita, the way we view Maya, sadasadvyam anirvachaniya avidya, in here, this Maya Shakti is played a little bit more. Ajarasya jadatvena vartanam, how can the sentient, the conscious entity, the absolute, the Atman, to manifest in the form of the world as non-sentient, materialized form? Because we have this dichotomy, you see, of consciousness and the world, internal, external, mind, matter. How does it create this dichotomy? And then it says that because of this Maya, Maya ya swatantriyam, this is the freedom intrinsic to Maya. Annadimaya tatteshu swatantraha parameshwaraha jada chetana rupena tatra pravishtavan. So this swatantra, absolutely free, absolute, entered into the elements as food. Now it is referring to Panchakosha, Annamaya, Pranamaya, Vijnanamaya. You already know those koshas. So now the translation I give, among the elements such as food, God is always free and he enters into all in both the forms of the sentient and non-sentient. So far, what I have stressed is the concept of categories, identical, the stress on swatantra, that is identical, and then the identity of Shakti and Shaktiman, that also is identical. So the elements I'm observing in this text are very much identical to the Trika materials or the Trika philosophical concepts. Tasmat samasta drishyam hi samsaraha parikirtita sankocham praptavanishaha sansariti avadharaya. Therefore, recognize the entire world as an object of perception and the very God that has been delimited as the one transmigrating in the world. So this verse I find interesting because if you read the Pratyabhijna Hridayam, the sutra explicitly says that the individuation is a sankocha, delimitation of the boundless Shiva consciousness, sankuchita atma. So the pancha kanchukas, all these kanchukas delimit us, make us limited being, and because the concept of sankocha is yet again Trika terminology. And so I'm reading, adding more in the vocabulary within the text of why this text should be regarded as a Trika text. Drishyam samastam sansaraha sansari jiva eva he tayos tadatmya sambandho mayayetyavadharaya. If the entire world is the object of perception, and the individual self is the one transmigrating in the world, recognize the identity between these two as Maya. So, what is the role of Maya? This author actually finds its own unique position. So, while he's blending Advaita Vedanta and Trika, sometimes, for that he has to be creative and original. And then that is where I find its originality, is what connects Jiva with the samsara, the world, is like the identity is established by means of Maya. It is not saying deluded. It is not saying its own freedom. And what it is saying is, Maya is being identical and breathing the world with the self, individual self. So this Maya, the limiting factor or projecting factor, it is working both ways here. Maya projects the reality that is not there. Maya also delimits the reality, and therefore we see things maybe slightly otherwise. And that is what it does here. Yaha swanubhutya bharupaha swatantraha parameshwaraha tasmin bhati mahadvishwam akashe mega sangavat. The Supreme Lord is free, manifesting with its own self-awareness, and the entire world manifests within him, similar to the clouds in the sky. This idea needs to be explored further. Number one, it is not saying there is no creation. What it is saying, the world is projected within Shiva consciousness, within pure consciousness. Now read the Pratyabhijna Sutra, Pratyabhijna Hridayam once again. Chitihi Swatantra Vishwasiddhi Hetu Swechaya Swabhitau Vishwam Unmilayati. That is the second sutra. So first sutra is Chiti Swatantra Vishwasiddhi Hetu. This pure consciousness is autonomous in accomplishing the world, the manifold world. And the second sutra is saying Swechaya, by its own will, its intrinsic volition, Swabhitta, within its own canvas, a screen, Vishwam, the world, Unmilayati, reveals, manifests. So this pure consciousness manifests the world not outside of it. It is happening within. Where consciousness is not projecting outside. Consciousness is revealing the world, externality within itself. That is why we have the concept of abhasa. It's not like a projecting somewhere else. It's just very entity manifesting as something else. And just like the metaphor is also beautiful here. What it says is akashe mega sangava, just like the clouds in the big sky. So clouds are not outside of the sky. The world is not outside of the body of God, of pure consciousness or Paramatman. All these three terms are repeatedly, synonymously used here: Ishvara, Paramatman, and then Shiva, and so these are the terminologies interchangeably used in the text. Antar bahishcha jagatam bodha rupena yah sthitaha sa eva paramatmeti prochyate sukshmadarshivih. That what resides within and without the world in the form of consciousness is what is called as the Supreme Self by those endowed with deeper insight. Antar bahishcha jagatam bodha rupena. So what is that Paramatman? The Supreme Self, the absolute foundational reality. It is what is within and without everything that manifests in the form of pure consciousness. It resides and manifests in all the forms. What is the basis? The basis is pure consciousness itself. And that is where Advaita texts and Trika texts are not going to have an argument. That's the foundation for both the philosophies. The world is not outside. The world is projected within. Where it is in pure consciousness. And then what makes this projection possible? This is Maya. How do we interpret Maya? Then we go into nitty-gritty detail. And that is where we are going to have some differences. Yathabdau lavana vyaptir bahirantaha sada bhavet tathatmano jagat vyaptir bahirantaha sada bhavet. Just like there always is salt within and without the ocean, and the world is the same way within and without the self. So when you look from outside and then sip in water, it is salty. When you go dive deep and then pick up some water, it is salty. The same way, what it is saying, everywhere in the world, wherever there is any form, any manifestation, there always is consciousness. Think this way. Anytime you think A, B, C, D, E, any object in the world, can you really think of something without you having consciousness? It would be just like, can a pot or can a dead man think? Only when you have consciousness, you can think. So then, for anything to manifest to us, for anything to come into our consciousness, we do need this foundational consciousness as a priority. We cannot continue our conversation without having consciousness as the basis for us to think through. Antar bahishcha vyaptam hi sarvada jagato navaha asangam cha vyavachedam atmano bhajate yatha tatha dehi jagat sarvam samvyapya parayadiya asangam cha vyavachedam bhajate svatmanah sada. Just like the sky permeating within and without the entire world is not attached to itself and is not conditioned by itself, the same way an embodied being, while permeating the entire world, realizes one's indifference and unbound nature with his higher insight. Now, I find these examples crucial also now to connect to the Advaita Vedanta, because if you read Gaudapada Karika, for example, particularly read chapter 3, and you will see how this Akasha example is so prevalent in describing the manifestation within consciousness of the duality, and then also the centrality of Maya in Gaudapad's text. So these are two interesting points. But in the later times, almost around the same time when Siddhanta Panjara was written, there was another book written, Panchadasi, maybe slightly later, but around the same time, written by Vidyaranya Swami from the school of Advaita Vedanta. Now, if you read Panchadasi, then you will see the whole metaphor of this delimitation within the sky scala consciousness comes to the central, metaphor. Khaditya dipite kudde, darpanaditya diptivat. There are so many verses I could chant, but I just am refraining myself from overwhelming Sanskrit passages for you. But the basic idea is that there is just like the sky and the delimitation within sky, and then some wall in which some reflection happens. And so we have these metaphors, and sometimes we miss the metaphoric similarity when we are just simply looking for the citations of the book or some clear reference to the authors, and then that we may mistake, we may miss where we could make a decisive comparative study. When we are trying to compare the two schools of thought, we have to also pay attention to the depth to which they use their metaphors. Tasman jagadidam vyapya yaha puman avatisthate sa eva sarvada tajnaihi paramatmeti giyate. The very self that exists as permeating this world is what is always called as the supreme self by those who have realized it. Now, the use of Puman is a very common term, Purusha as Atman, the Paramatma self. So I would not say that that is what constitutes it as either Trika or Advaita Vedanta. But now, the difference between Puman and Paramatma, the terminology is more like Advaita Vedanta terminology here. And so that is what makes interesting is not a one school vocabulary, but what makes this interesting, at least to me, is a vocabulary that makes it a common text for two different philosophical traditions. Sarvakaro hi Bhagavan yena bhavena jantuna upasyate bhagavata tat sarvam parigrihyate. It also gives a little path of devotion, which you sometimes find in Advaita texts, not always. I mean, I'm not counting Bhagavad Gita per se, because it's all the texts. Like, there are so many different commentaries, and you cannot only say this is only an Advaita. But the text is Sarvakarohi, the God is endowed with all forms, and in whatever the form, mode the embodied being worships. Tasya tasya chalam sraddham tame vividadhamyaham. So this is, I'm reading this as some kind of influence of the line from the Bhagavad Gita. But anyway, so most texts are influenced, Hindu texts are influenced by Bhagavad Gita, so that's not a big issue. But now the example next will be a little big issue. Daruni agnir yatha tailam tile tadvat pumanapi bahirantaha prapanchasya vyapta rupena sanstita. Just like fire in the wood or oil in sesame seed, the self permeates the manifest world within and without. The example of Daru and Agni, firewood and fire, sesame seed and oil. I find the firewood and fire metaphor particularly interesting, because if you read Sulabha's conversation in the Mahabharata Shanti Parva, that is where King Janaka is challenged and pressed by Sulabha, this hermit yogini, who comes and discusses that there is no difference between the manifest materiality and the absolute pure consciousness, because how can you separate fire from the firewood? The same way consciousness is that within every manifest mode of being, everything that manifests has that very consciousness soaked within. And that is why I find very interesting, because it's not really where I'm going right now with this is the Advaita Vedanta that we credit to Adi Shankara, or the Trika system that we can credit to Vasugupta and Somananda, are much later to the Mahabharata text. So this is in a sense like early Advaita. So when these authors are living through these early Advaita metaphors, they do not have any difficulty to navigate through these two systems of Shankara's Advaita and the Trika system. And Vishwase krite tena purnattam syat tavapi cha purnatve cha susamsiddhe vishwatmamapi jayate. When you have a firm conviction, you will also recognize fullness. And when you recognize fullness, you will also actualize that your very self is the totality in the form of the world. This I chose this verse for a particular reason, that Purnata, fullness, is crucial here. And this Purnata, and the next crucial terminology here is Vaishwatma or Vishwatma Bhava. These two concepts are central in, as I mentioned earlier, the Virupaksha Panchashika. And now you can see clearly, and then yes, you can find in other Trika texts also, but not much in particularly Vishwatmata, not in Advaita Vedanta text. And this type of Purnata Khyati is also not central to the Advaita Vedanta text. Tatha sthite cha vishwasya shariratvam cha jayate shariri paramatmeti buddhau samyak prajayate. When situated like this, the world becomes his body and becomes firmly established in his mind that the one dwelling in the body is the Supreme Self. Now, this the core practice taught in the Trika system is, particularly if you stress in Virupaksha's teachings, is how to expand our ego-ity to encompass the totality. In our pristine state of consciousness, the text is not saying get out of the manifest modes of consciousness, because all the manifest modes are already subsumed within the very pristine form of consciousness. What it is teaching is actually that we go back to recognize this foundational consciousness, and we do not need to have an eraser to the manifest modes. Why? The metaphor, let's go back to the metaphor. How can you erase heat from fire, or oil from the sesame seed? Let me go back to another metaphor. How do you need to remove the clouds for you to know that there is the sky? For only children, that when there is cloud, they think that there is no more sky. You know, the sky is all covered with the cloud, and the sky does not exist. But all the grown-ups know what the sky means actually is the empty space. And empty space is as it was before, only the clouds are covering a little bit, and above the cloud, below the cloud, everywhere, there always is the sky. The same way, consciousness is to the manifest world. There are these manifestations subsumed within the singularity of consciousness, and they, whether they are manifest, these objects or not, it does not conflict the singularity of pure being, pure consciousnness. Now, coming back to the original point I was trying to make is, how could a text be read as a philosophy of a different school if this was not giving you enough hints? While I have chosen selectively a few verses out of a big, like a couple hundred verses, And there are many others that will make you decisively that this is the Advaita Vedanta text. But I have given you some evidence, and I have not traced all the examples because I wanted to wrap up within short time and not go into nitty-gritty detail like we do in our journal article papers. So just to show you why a text like this has enriched both the schools, or is enriched by the philosophies from both the schools of thought. What is it for us to take home from this conversation? Because there are many consequences for like this. Number one, we are not like some geniuses trying to bridge these two schools. This has happened for a long time. That's number one. Number two, many scholars, even today, are dogmatically thinking that Kashmir is the host and that is it. The philosophy did not spread outside and it had marginal influence in the subcontinent. And this is wrong. With the Virupaksha Panchashika, as we are reading, is itself a text written outside of Kashmir and around maybe 13th, 14th century. This text, which is written subsequent to Virupaksha Panchashika, is yet again in Kerala around 14th century. So the textual dissemination of the Trika or Kashmiri philosophy throughout the subcontinent did actually happen, and we have not paid attention to or read the books that are left in the marginal footnotes or in rotting in some libraries, and we are not paying attention to excavate them. And mostly we have maybe about roughly 90% of the books on Hindu philosophy are just in the form of microfilms or manuscripts. So we have not even edited and translated them. So our understanding of the dissemination of the schools of Hindu thought within the subcontinent is itself very limited. And for the people who are practicing Advaita Vedanta, I do not know how, but are practicing Trika and then feeling like scared of, reading Advaita Vedanta text, these books give you the hope that these both philosophical schools are not opposite philosophies. There is a huge convergence. There is a huge conversation happening, not today, but since classical times. And it is good for us to explore the ways that we can actually bridge these schools and go to the depth. And yes, of course, this is one approach. And then you can always explore the differences also. I want to stop here so that we can have some time for a conversation. Thank you so much. And I welcome any question.
Thank you so much, Professor Staneshwarji. Of course, it's a very interesting topic with the two schools that were, which people are trying to project as completely different. But as you said, that this text has come as a revelation to us. So how did this Kashmir Shaivism spread in the rest of India? I mean, what was the method and what was the way it went around? Was it very much prevalent, contrary to what the myth is that it was only in Kashmir?
So this is how we have to read. A little bit of historical knowledge will help us to ground these traditions. Number one, many of the original agamas were predate, almost all the agamas predate the Kashmiri philosophical school. So we have the Advaita Siddhanta text, Advaita Raudra agamas, and then Bhairava agamas. So we need to read, when we are reading Abhinavagupta, for example, decisively, of course, he comes at the pinnacle of philosophical thinking and he hails from Kashmir, no doubt about that. But you need to know where he's getting his ideas from. He's reading these agamas. And these agamas were not written maybe some of them could have been written in Kashmir, but they were written throughout the subcontinent, and we do not know where they were written. And maybe some of them were written outside of modern day India, okay, maybe in Swat Valley, in some parts of Pakistan and some parts of Afghanistan. And so it's a much wider basis in which scholars like Abhinavagupta, philosophers like Abhinavagupta are grounding their philosophy. So we need to go, number one, that just like Shankaracharya didn't just bring a philosophy without any foundation, there already is Upanishads and Bhagavad Gita. The same way, Abhinavagupta didn't create a philosophy without any foundation. There are these great thinkers, but more than that, there were all these agamas, and they were distributed throughout the subcontinent much earlier times, number one point. Number two, these philosophies were grounded on practice, some manuals, and these practice manuals are distributed throughout the continent. If you go to Nepal, if you go to Kerala, if you go to many other places, you are going to find tremendous amount of Kalikakrama manuscripts that are also found in the Kashmiri sources because they are common. Okay, so we are only reading philosophies as philosophies. We are not reading these philosophies as interpretive tools for the practices people were having. These were descriptions and these were meticulous reflections upon the practices. If you read Tantra Loka, Abhinavagupta makes it clear that it is a paddhati, it's a manual in itself, and you can see that he is grounding the manual based on many, many other agamas, like Devya Yamala, for example. And so, and after the Kashmiri, purely Kashmiri thinking, if you read, like Mahartha Manjari or Mahanaya Prakasha, those purely Kalikakrama texts, they reveal the same tendency that these books were, by the way, written outside of Kashmir. Nobody claims that Mahartha Manjari or Mahanaya were written decisively in Kashmir. And then the same way, read the Amritananda's Deepika commentary in Yogini Hridayam, for example. So there's a tremendous amount of writing that continued happening outside of Kashmir after the decline of writing in Trika Siddhanta within Kashmir. And that is the thing we need to pay attention to, see the amount of exchange that occurred. Unfortunately, we are not seriously reading these materials anymore, and they're just basically some people who wrote, and then we are following blindly those marginal writings. Thank you.
That was wonderful. You started it for us by talking to us about this beautiful text, Siddhanta Panjara. I'm curious, what would have gone to the mind of this author when he tried to bring these two schools together, like read it both as an Advaita Vedanta text and as a Kashmiri Shaivism text? What must have been the compulsion to write a text like this, you think?
No, I think that his challenge and my own personal life journey would not be very different. At the age of 16, by the grace of Lord Shiva, I found two gurus. And one happens to be Trika Siddhanta Kalikakrama Sarvamnaya master, and another is the Advaita Vedanta teacher from Shankara's order. And and they both respected each other, and there was a total permission from both the gurus to study and learn from each other. So most likely similar type of thing might have happened in Vinayaka's, because Kerala, maybe he had some Kalikakrama there. And then also must have read the, from Kerala, of course, Shankara's Advaita Vedanta is there too. So these two things are culturally ingrained, like how deeply, Kerala, and how much Kali is prevalent there. And then, of course, Advaita of Shankara is, of course, prevalent. So it's bridging these two phenomena. But are they even bridging? Because we are not maybe even reading to the earlier times. I'm saying bridging only based on the text I have now. But if we were to go to more and more of the original sources, they are simply, transmitting the knowledge imparted to them by their gurus. I think that in the lived practices, there this type of homogeneity. Like if you read Saundarya Lahari, for example, attributed to Shankaracharya, precisely a Shakta Tantric text with a tremendous amount of Trika concept embedded within it, and a lot of Kubjika Mata materials available in it. So this type of integration is very widespread and crucial to understanding Hindu religiosity. We are reading Hindu religiosity through the lenses of more like the Western traditions, and that is sometimes problematic. Why? Is because these differences are major. In the Hindu religious life, a lot of things are integrated together. Like worshipping Shiva and Vishnu in the same single form, like Harihara, for example. You know, Hari is separate, Hara is separate. Then why do fight about it? Just worship Harihara, make a single god, Harihara, and then do worship. And we have, by the way, I'm from Nepal originally, and we have the tradition of Harihara very prevalent there. So, besides Pashupata's, of course, you know. So, thank you.
We have some more question. Krishna Chaitanya wants to know what is the Guru-Parampara of the Trika Siddhanta?
The Trika Siddhanta, you know, is not just some individual swim of starting, let me start one parampara now. It is just comes from Lord Shiva himself, and Srikantha is in the world. But for the Kali Yuga, there is not just one Trika Siddhanta. Within that, we have the Kaula Parampara and then Trika Parampara. And then within these paramparas, we have the Kaliga Kramas, Hanuka Datta, Erika, like all these Erika and Kallata and Samananda Kallata, all these Guru Paramparas come. But then in the Kaula Parampara, precisely we have Kakumeva, Khagendra, Kurmanatha, Meshanatha, Matsendranath, and then all these Natha Yoga Siddha Parampara we have. And then that continues, actually, you know, these Guru Paramparas are still kept alive in many parts of India. So this is not that these Paramparas are dead, only that these are still kept a secret by most of the teachers. So there are decisive Paramparas, and we can trace, like if you read, for example, Sri Vidyanava Tantra, it gives you different genealogies for each of the Kadikrama Guru, like Paschimamaya Krama Guru, or whichever the Krama Guru you pick, then at least for up till his time. And then for myself, like when I want to relate to go back to my own Guru genealogy, I can go back to many of these traditions, go trace to Shankaracharya, you know, Shankara's lineages. And there are also other lineages we can trace to. So these lineages are pretty much alive, and there are diverse traditions. Tantra is not one tradition. Tantra is not one Amnaya. And then there are multiple different Guru lineages within it. Thank you.
I think they want you, if you can later just share your email address. I think there's a request for that. There's Alejandro has made a comment that while these two school of he says that while there is some harmonization around these two schools, what would you say are the cultural and religious practices built on or around them, around both Advaita Vedanta and Kashmir Shaivism? I suppose that's his question. And what is he? And he says, what is the source of the perception that Advaita Vedanta and Trika are so far apart?
Okay, first of all, from liturgically speaking, at least let us go back to Vidyaranya's time, later 14th and early 15th century. Vidyaranya, on the other hand, on the one hand, was a minister and one of the prominent Advaita Vedanta philosophers, monk, ordained in the school of Shankaracharya, and who has written prominent texts like Jivan Mukti Viveka and Panchadasi, a major book to study Advaita Vedanta. At the same time, he is also the author of a voluminous work Sri Vidyarnava Tantra. So you can see that in the life of a 15th century Shankara order monk has himself offered major books. I would say, practically speaking, the most commonly used among Shaktas like the masters Sri Vidyarnava and most commonly used among the Advaita Vedantins, the Panchadashi, the author is the same person. Why? Because Vedanta is one side, it gives you philosophy of recognizing singularity of consciousness by means of negation. Trika Siddhanta confirms the same singularity of consciousness by means of affirmation. And that both the tendencies are already there in the Upanishads. You can read Neti Neti. I would say that is the Advaita Vedanta approach. Neither this nor that. And you go through negation. This is form, negate the form. This is nama, negate the nama. And then you go to the most exalted, pure singularity of consciousness. When you go through the Trika, then Sarvam Khalu Idam Brahma, the Upanishad says the entire world, everything of the manifest is the very Brahman. That Brahman means Chaitanya, pure consciousness. So everything that is manifest is pure consciousness. Now we can go read that as a means of affirmation. You see? So one is the approach of negation, the goal is the same, to confirm the singularity of pure consciousness. Another is the approach of negation, whether you are confirming, whether you are negating, what is established is the singularity of pure consciousness. So therefore, why are we so worried whether these two approaches make a diametrical difference? But then the question came, when did it start? This started not today, though. I don't just blame a bunch of white scholars going to India and trying to split us. You know, some people like to stay there. This started from the smarter orthodoxy. They saw that these tantrics were not too focused on, food codes and dress codes, and for them philosophies were marginal. This is eating garlic. Oh my gosh, he's going to go to hell. He can never have Brahmagyan. And then tantrics felt like that is rubbish. And so this is the type of smarter text you can find that the difference, and then a little bit of even I can say animosity towards. And this is not about philosophy. This is about the course of conduct. These guys are having sex. Oh my gosh, that is gross. We are so pure, holy Mahatmas. Who cares what we do inside, our private life? But basically, practically, we are not going to say out publicly, right? So that became like one attitude. This is the social attitude. But then later, that thing got more accepted or universalized in the contemporary studies, or they saw that the already sort of a division between these two schools based on these codes of conduct rather than philosophies got a boost based on this Aryan Dravidian type of concept that Tantra is Dravidian thing, Veda is Aryan thing. Therefore, these are completely two different civilizations. And I really do not read Tantra as a completely outside of the Vedas. And for that, I'm happy to go and talk just one day only to trace almost all the tantric concepts from within Rig Veda. So therefore, we are not reading anything closely. We are creating things to rift things apart. And that is what is problematic. And as far as if you are spiritually inclined, which I know, Alexander, so read these things. Nothing is going to happen. Yeah, this is very good thing to read both.
Thank you so much, Staneshwarji. We would have loved to continue, but unfortunately, time is reminding us that we have to close this session. We have many more such sessions, and later today we will have Deen Dayal Upadhyay on Jagadguru Shankaracharya. This is being brought to us by Mahesh Chandra Sharma. So please do sign in for that also and enjoy these sessions. Thank you very much and namaste.
Namaskara. Thank you so much for having me here.
Thank
you, Nitin.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Wonderful session.
Appreciate it. Okay, sure. Thanks.